If I was asked to give a title for this sermon, it would be Generosity and Kicking Things. You'll see why as we go on. We have 4 Gospels that tell us about Jesus. They all tell us that Jesus was the Son of God. But what are the differences between them? Mark is mostly about what happened. Although if that was the only Gospel, we would not know very much about what Jesus said. Luke and Matthew both describe events that happened, as does Mark, but they include a lot more, about what Jesus said. John is different to the others. Like the others, John has events that happened and things that Jesus said, although John often quotes things that Jesus said or recounts things that Jesus did at different times and in different places to things recorded in the other Gospels. There is another difference. John has more on a "what does it mean?" sort of question. Why did Jesus come? What did Jesus achieve? What does that mean for you and for me? It's teaching. It's explaining the significance of what was revealed. And the short name for it is theology, although explaining it all gets to the idea rather well. All 3 of the Bible passages today fit into this explanation category. John also has some of what happened when, and his prologue also connects into another gospel theme, and that's the generous love of God. The John passage, the prologue at the beginning of the gospel, it's a beautifully constructed piece of writing. There are lovely phrases. It refers to life, which is the light of mankind. And that's a statement of hope at a time when we need it. It refers to Jesus being full of grace and truth. But I'm not just talking about elegance and beauty. I'm talking about content. As a prologue is supposed to do, it mentions events so far. John the Baptist is briefly mentioned, but before that, John tells us that Jesus goes right back to creation. John refers to the Word, and at verse 14, John says very clearly that this Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So the Word was Jesus in a previous form, although we're not told very much about what kind of form that was. Right from the very first sentence, John makes clear that the Word was divine. The Word was God. The Word is with God. I can recognize that as 2 parts of the Trinity. The Colossians passage is very clearly and explicitly saying that Christ, in this previous form, was the first at creation, that all of creation was through him. So here St. Paul writing Colossians and John writing the Gospel are saying the same thing. The purpose of that Colossians passage was to stamp on a heresy, so I'm told, which said that the risen Christ was not God, but was somewhere in a hierarchy. There were some more senior beings above him. I suppose, for an analogy, if you think about a junior minister who is not a cabinet minister, still less prime minister or sovereign, you get the general idea. Anyway, in this passage, Paul is being very emphatic. It's almost as if he was banging his fist on the table as he spoke. And verse 19 is the key point. Paul writes, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell." So Paul is saying, if anyone says Jesus wasn't right at the very top, forget it. So Paul is kicking down a false teaching. John's prologue also kicks at a fallacy. The fallacy is some kind of supposition that because Jesus was born human, he was never anything more than human and somehow adopted by God. No, John is emphasizing the contrary. The Word was God and was with God in the very beginning. How does it go on from there? The prologue starts to build a theme. The Word was the source of light and life, a light that overcomes darkness. But when this light came to the world which the light had created, the very place where he had every right to be, he encountered rejection. People didn't recognize him. And then comes a sharp contrast. It's at verse 12. I'll read it to be sure I get it right. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Well, that verse is again something kicking down some mistaken ideas which you sometimes hear. First one is the idea that salvation is earned through being good. Some of the old medieval ideas of judgment do seem to say that you earn salvation. You occasionally hear of people saying, "I'm not good enough for God." Well, this promise in John 1:12, says that's not right. It refers to all who believe. There's no way we'll ever succeed in earning salvation, but it's God's generous gift to those who believe. It's the grace mentioned at the end of verse 14. And so this bit of the prologue, it's introducing a gospel theme that we can be accepted by God, not because we deserve it, but because of what Jesus has done for us. What do we have to do? Believe and let Jesus in. Oh, and another possible fallacy. There's the idea that this isn't there for everyone, but it's for a chosen few. Well, putting that in modern terms, what John is saying, all. Now, which part of the word all is difficult to understand? So now I'm coming to the generosity of God. God gave us a new relationship with himself. Or perhaps I should say Jesus won the new relationship with God at the cross. But the wonderful word in verse 12 is the word children. Jesus and his Father haven't just got us out of a fix. He doesn't just make us into servants, even highly valued servants. No, he's making us family. There's another verse, this time it's in the first letter of John, which stresses the generosity of God. It's the first verse of chapter 3. Again, I'll read it. This is 1 John chapter 3, first verse. How great is the love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. I have to mention that different translations pick slightly different words to translate that verse. That's one of two translations which use the word lavish. God has done more than the minimum. That's the force of the verse, never mind exactly which words are picked. Now think about it. There's all kinds of relationships. We're all familiar with supplier and customer, organisation and end user. I wrote down sovereign and subject, but perhaps in our society we should really say government and citizen. Well, they're all remote, transactional relationships. Employer-manager or pupil and teacher can be rather warmer relationships. But parent and child is more complete than any of those. I think of my parents who did a lot for me, what they could afford, and I suspect a bit more than they could ever afford. Now, if my children have a problem, never mind that they've got children of their own, it's still my first thought is, how can I help? Any parent and child relationship has got different parts to it. There's love, care, provision, and also at different times teaching, example, and if and when necessary, discipline. But they're all mixed together, and that's more than even a good teacher-pupil relationship. So that word children leads me to say that the relationship with our Heavenly Father can be a very full, rich and complete relationship in ways that other relationships, even good ones, might not reach. Led me on to another thought about that. When we first learn about Christian belief, where would that be? Through Sunday school? Through friends? Well, whatever, there can be a bit of a pupil and teacher relationship, which may be exactly appropriate in the circumstances. I'm not knocking it. Yet it's not impossible that someone picks up an idea on the way that isn't quite right. Perhaps they think that God is severe, or remote, or rather demanding, or not always interested in us. Well, if there is such an idea, that promise that we can become children of God is taking a kick at it. The kick is in just that one word, children. And on God's generosity, it led me to think of one rather saintly man who I heard talk. His talks always seemed to have the words, God is the kindest person I know, somewhere near the beginning of the talk, and quite possibly in the middle of the talk, and probably at the end of the talk as well.